It's Reality Check with Craig Price.
I'm an idiot.
4 minutes in and I'm already wrong.
I'm like a monkey. Hello, look at me.
You're like a beautiful mind. I'm more like Forrest Gump.
So it's,
Craig Price is the man.
I knew it. Craig, shut up. It's Reality Check with Craig Price. I'm your host, Craig Price, and this week, Jennifer Kahnweiler is here to discuss introverts. Thanks for listening to the show. Got a great interview for you. But before we get to it, a quick reminder that if you don't have the app, you can go to realitycheckpodcast.com and download it for iTunes, Google Play, or for Kindle. Lots of extras and information all in one neat little place. Also, reviews keep coming in, and we could always use more. They are the currency of podcasts, so if you could, please head over to iTunes today, leave a review, or at least click 5 stars. It would certainly help. But on to today's guest. Many speakers and comedians I know are actually pretty introverted people. No matter how outgoing or zany they may appear on stage or at events, many dread crowds. They dislike making small talk, or they just don't like being with other human beings. So when a listener suggested that I should interview Jennifer Kahnweiler about her book about introverts and extroverts working together, I jumped at the chance. I've learned to be more outgoing. It's a learned thing. In fact, that's one of the reasons I do the podcast, is to get out of my comfort zone and kind of force myself to meet and network with new people. I mean, it's really worked for me because I still don't have to leave the house very often, but I'm meeting new folks. And now the only time I really need to interact with folks face-to-face is when they pay me to, so that's pretty cool. So let's talk about introverts, both pro and con, but mostly pro, with Jennifer Kahnweiler. Introverts seem to be like a word people use as a catch-all nowadays, and they kind of misuse it, I feel. It's kind of like the word geek. People all say, oh, I was a geek when I was in school. And it's like, no, you were a cheerleader when you were in school. You have no idea what the word geek means. And it's like introverts. If you're not wild and crazy, people go, well, I'm introverted. Are there varying degrees of introverts and different types of introverts?
Yes, there are. Introversion is, Craig, on a sliding scale. So most people are not extreme introverted or extremely introverted or extremely extroverted. There's a term now that's popping up, Craig. I don't know if you've heard it, ambivert.
I have not. What is?
Which refers to basically it's like being ambidextrous. I think in reality, most of us do operate from both sides of the spectrum of introversion, extroversion. But I would still say that, Carl Jung back in the day was right when he said that we get our energy from either inside ourselves or outside ourselves. Extroverts thrive on people. They charge their battery up from being out with people and out and engaged in the world many times a day sometimes, right? And unlike introverts who are recharging their batteries from within. So they get their internal energy from being in their heads. And I think he was pretty spot on with that definition.
So basically, it's all about how you recharge yourself is what I'm hearing, is that, if you get excited around other people, you're probably an extrovert. And if you get excited not being around people, like I do, I get
Yes.
really excited about being able to go away from the party.
I loved it when you described the way you are. It's very much like my husband, Bill, who does actually still use a do not disturb sign on his door and expects that we're going to pay attention when it's up. I say, are you a teenager or are you? But he truly does. He laughs about it like you, but he also is serious about that. But without that time, a true introvert will say to you, if I don't have that time, that's when I get stressed. Because it's not only decompressing, it's also the place where the creative ideas come, the innovation, the enlightenment. Quiet time is, we realize more and more now, is so essential, particularly to our highly functioning, sometimes crazy environments.
Well, it seems like a lot of people distrust or do not really appreciate people who are shy or introverted. It's like if you're not this obnoxious Donald Trump-like figure who's expressing their mind all the time, there must be something wrong with you.
Yes, absolutely.
Why are people so suspicious of introverted folks?
Well, people get uncomfortable, in particular, I should say, extroverts or extroverted society, with that type of temperament, with somebody who is more withdrawn or doesn't speak up quickly, because there is, particularly in Western society, this expectation that we share our ideas and we be social and show smiles on our faces. And in my research through the last 8 years, where I've been writing these books on introverted leader and quiet influence, it's come up time and time again, Craig, even with the rise of the introverts, as I call it now, with more awareness, that there's still this tremendous bias. And I just think people are uncomfortable when folks don't necessarily act like the life of the party. And but the good news is things are changing. We're seeing a shift with individuals and luckily and thankfully with organizations as we have more awareness about different styles and realize there's nothing wrong with introverts. In fact, with the fact that introverts have so much to contribute, we are really losing if we don't stop and listen. But you're absolutely right. There's a tremendous amount of bias that still exists.
And my guest today is Jennifer Kahnweiler. She is the author of The Genius of Opposites, How Introverts and Extroverts Achieve Extraordinary Results Together. And the reason why I brought you on is because I was telling you earlier, the extroverts, we know about them. Because they're extroverts. They're obnoxious and they won't stop telling us about themselves. Where introverts, they can be shy. They do have a spectrum. What are some of the positive attributes? Because I think that's what's missing a lot, is that people often overlook introverts because they are shy.
Yes, yeah. But I will stop you right there because one of the things you just said, I think it was the judgment, would you say?
Oh, no.
Being obnoxious.
It's all judgment.
I think extroverts, it's all judgment. That's what we're all about. But I think that's part of the problem, too, that happens between introverts and extroverts. We do a lot of judging. And that's why I wrote this latest book, Accepting the Genius of Opposites, because one of the terms that I came up with is accepting the alien. That we have to accept that we're not going to change somebody, but, that they have a lot to offer. So in answer to your question, Craig, about what I think these strengths you really wanted to we talked about this before the show too, that introverts have tremendous amount of strengths. And what I found is that when they leverage those strengths, when they stop trying to act extroverted and be people that they're not, then that's when they get the greatest results. That's when they provoke new ideas. That's when they create change, when they inspire others. And that happens using strengths like listening, the engaged listening, the observation, the calm temperament, the focused conversations that they have. I mentioned earlier the taking quiet time. The key strength that they have, or another real critical strength that comes into play, is preparation. If you, and I probably would find that from you, right, Craig? You're very well prepared as an introvert. You take the time to think about things. Am I wrong about that one?
Yeah, yes.
Blow my stereotype there.
Well, I may be what you called an ambivert earlier. When I do my podcast, I don't prepare that much. I have a couple questions in case you're quiet, but most of it is just, I'm a curious person, so I kind of just go, I have a bunch of questions. That's why you're on the show. I would never invite someone on who I already knew everything about it and I don't have any questions. I'm not that prepared. I guess it's because of my life. I've been able to wing a lot of my life. I've been able to go with the flow.
Right.
And
Interesting.
Yeah, it's just a talent that I've accrued. It's just like when I can go to a party and I can actually interact and be funny and be charming sometimes. I can be normal, so to speak. That is a learned thing I have done as well. It's just one of these traits I've learned.
Well, it's sort of like if you break your dominant hand, and then you have to use the other one all the time, you become better adapted over time, better adapted to writing and to using that hand. But you'll never use that hand in the same way that you use the dominant hand. But you can adjust. We can develop that muscle. And that's what's so cool about all of this work that I've been doing, because introverts can learn to take on extroverted qualities, again, with the caveat that they don't become or try to become an extrovert. But yeah, there are times when you have to be that way. The interesting thing now is, as we're having all this awareness come out, that I found is that the extroverts, believe it or not, Craig, they really are starting to appreciate those qualities that introverts have. I was just meeting with a salesperson who's extremely extroverted. He was telling me about how he is actually consciously putting signs up around his phone when he's calling on customers saying, "Shut up, be quiet." Because he realizes that when he talks, he loses the sale. But when he takes that silence, that introverts just treasure, that time in his head, or just to reflect and to not say the first thing, like you were saying, winging it, right? The first thing out of your mouth, then he's so much more effective in getting the sale. And I think we have so many examples of using those behaviors that work for us.
Now, do you think it's a nature versus nurture situation? Are people just born introverted, or is it something that they learn young?
Both. Yeah, I think it's both. I think if you ask any parent with two children, they'll tell you. And I was just talking with a mom today who was telling me that she knew that when her child was in the womb, what the personality was like. So I think there is genetics that come into it. We certainly know that. But I think there's also the environment has a great impact on how we are given permission to be ourselves. And I think that's kind of the liberating and exciting thing about this whole movement about what I call the rise of the introverts. It's even starting with children being aware of what their temperaments are, and teachers, and not forcing them like a lot of introverts have been forced, to come out of their room and talk with the family and not respect that quiet time. We're always having to participate in class and not allowing them to maybe write their ideas, and and the same thing in the workplace. So allowing people to be who they are is really making a difference. So I think the environment can certainly affect us at a very young age, either in a very positive way or a negative way. Our families certainly have, we know, a huge impact on how we come out in the world.
Yeah, because I see a lot of situations where with young kids, their parents try to cure their shyness or their introvertedness, like I said, like it's a problem.
Yes.
And it's really not necessarily
exactly.
It's not necessarily a problem yet. It's just a matter of they're not meeting the expectations their parents have for what social interaction they should be doing.
Totally. They project that on them. And you are using a term shy, which tends to be mixed up with introversion. Like you said, nothing's wrong with introversion. I couldn't have said it better. It's how you're wired. But shyness can really be a problem. It can create social and psychological anxiety. So in that case, you do have to take some steps to get over that. So I like to think introversion is just really a natural way of being, and just honoring that is so critical in every aspect, in work, in personal relationships. And that's, again, what I'm very pleased about with all of this. One thing you said earlier to me about I think you mentioned about being a stand-up comedian, I think earlier in the show, in your past.
Yeah. In my seedy past, yes, I was. And one thing that occurred, I'm sorry? No, I was going to say, I know a lot of stand-ups and a lot of speakers who are not necessarily as outgoing as they are when they're on stage.
Absolutely. That was going to be what I was going to say. You're just reading my mind today. What can I say? And I was going to say that to you because a lot of introverts will be comedians and actors, and if they have a part to play, I don't know if you found that you very much act as if you're confident and you know what role you're playing. I had one guy that I interviewed for the first book, The Introverted Leader, Paul, who worked at IBM and had some business development responsibilities, which he was very uncomfortable with. And he told me that when he would get off the plane, he would carry a pair of aviator glasses, and then he would put the glasses on and just sort of pretend he was James Bond. And if you could see this guy, Craig, you would know he wasn't definitely not sure. He doesn't look like him, but he really felt the part, and he acted. And during that meeting, he really could step into that role, and that would be a great classic example of how an introvert can flex. And then the key is, then when he gets back on the plane, he can be just Paul.
Yeah, I don't think I was trying to make play a part because I've really struggled my whole life to be me. And now I finally found, in the last probably 5-6 years, I finally got comfortable, and probably maybe too comfortable for some people, of who I am. So I try to be me as much as possible. But I feel when I'm speaking or when I was doing stand-up, the focus was on me on purpose, and I didn't have to compete for attention. This was my time. So, because if I'm in a room, you've got to compete for attention. Because there's other people to talk to. There's other conversations. There's someone holding court in the corner, making everybody laugh, and you're sitting there. Now is it my turn? It's like I didn't want to have to compete for attention, and so.
Interesting. Yeah.
But I know that if they're bringing me in for thousands of dollars and they put me on a stage with a microphone, that's my attention. for that moment. It's my job to do this, and I don't feel like I have to compete very much. I mean, stand up, you still got to compete. You still got to compete with drunks and hecklers, but very rarely.
Yeah.
So
right. And you probably learned some of your extemporaneous, sort of winging it skills that you talked about later from being on the stage. I know as a facilitator and a trainer, I learned, just basically anything somebody could say to you after a while, and you could come back with something to be able to handle it, and you learn that over time. So it's really interesting how this experience really does shape our manifestation of these qualities. And again, going back to the Jungian psychology, what I love, Carl Jung said that in the second half of life, we do kind of dip over to the other side of our temperament and develop more of a holistic sort of approach to everything. And I think that's another benefit I'll chalk up to aging to convince myself it's good.
I'm a big proponent of aging. I like getting older. I appreciate getting older because then when I was younger, nobody took me seriously. Even if I said something that was correct and profound, it was, oh, you're 22. What the hell do you know? And so I'm one of the few people who because I deal with older people all the time, and they're always lamenting the fact, or if you call them old, they get really upset. And it's like, no, you can call me old. I'm happy to get old. I'm happy to pay taxes because that means I'm making money, and I'm happy to get old. That means because life gets easier the older you get, except physically. That's the only difference I can say.
Stay healthy physically. Exactly. And I think confidence is a big thing that becomes stronger as you get older, because you don't really, old people will say to you, I don't really care what people think,
Yeah.
And so I think that as people step more into their temperaments and own who they are, that's been the exciting thing about this whole introversion too for me. Another real enlightening part of it for me. People will say to me, I finally feel validated. People are talking about these qualities as strengths, and I realize that I do have them. And so confidence really takes a beating in people who are more introverted over, their lives. They really feel like they're not as good as extroverts. So that's, thankfully, as I say, that's changing.
Now, I do have to get some questions from online because I told everybody that you were going to be on. And one of the things that someone brought up that I thought might be relevant is that how does the social media either enable or disable introverts? Because I feel like it enables a lot of the introverts because they can hide behind the machine.
Yes, absolutely. There is one of the strengths that I highlighted, and I found from the research I did with successful introverted influencers, and that's kind of a tongue twister, but is that they have a thoughtful use of social media. So they are very purposeful in how they use it. They understand, well, why am I on here? Maybe it's to learn and to follow some people, or it's to, create a brand in a more subtle way where I write a blog and I have a point of view. But it allows them, the luxury really of who they post to, when they post it, how they do it. And that's really plays to the introvert strength, again, of preparation and thinking things through and being a little more strategic, being more reflective. And I think the other benefit of social media, which has been tremendous, as you say, is you don't have to have the face-to-face conversation. You can actually have some very deep, I know introverts have very deep relationships with people. I'm not talking about in a romantic sense, but I'm talking about, just intellectually even, online, having real support for each other. I had a recent example here with this book that I just came out, The Genius of Opposites. I had probably 30 or so bloggers who were writing blog posts about the book, and I was, very grateful for that for sure. And then I realized that many of the bloggers know each other. They have these the way they talk about each other is like you think that they're like best friends. They've known each other forever, and most of them really probably, Craig, haven't ever met. But, for instance, blogs like Jesse Stoner in the leadership community, is connected with other folks as well. And I think it's very exciting. I think that's how even you and I connected, was through a connection through that. And I think, in years past, that wouldn't have really been a possibility. So I think in answer to your question, the question the person has, I think it's a real benefit. And of course, the downside is it can also be a lot of noise. And I know a lot of introverts who are very turned off by Facebook and sites like that where it's just too much stimulation, which can be a real negative to them. So as long as they can control that, then they're good to go.
Do you find social media makes extroverts slightly more introverted?
Not necessarily. I think they can be a little bit more random though, because they do react to stimuli and sort of like that rush, and so the checking of the phone. I mean, I think I haven't seen any research per se about if introverts or extroverts are more addicted to the kind of, the sites and the Twitter and all that, the Twitter and all, kind of like the dopamine sort of fix. But if I were to posit a guess on that, I would say that probably extroverts are a little more addicted in a sense. I'm going out on a limb here to really get their fix and check multiple times a day. And so I think, but I think it is a way for us all to connect to and to have a common story to share. And so when we do actually meet, like you and I are in the same professional group. So I experienced this when I went to NSA this year. There were people I haven't talked to all year, but yet we're friends on Facebook, or we follow each other on Twitter, Instagram. And I have a little sense of what's going on with them. So even if it's a personal kind of stuff going on with their family, and we can pick up a conversation and then maybe move into some other things. But have you found that as well, that it can be helpful?
Oh, sure. I think it can definitely enable the negative parts of hiding out, of staying away from people. It's not necessarily being shy. It's just like I personally, like I said, I'm a misanthropic recluse. I prefer to be home alone with my dogs. I don't like to go to parties very much. And when I'm there, I feel like I have to be on, which can be annoying for not just myself, but for the people who are dealing with me. Because often what happens is about an hour into a party, someone will go, "Are you always on?" And then I'm like, and I feel like I'm just me, but I think it's the stress and the anxiety of being, and like I said, competing for attention. Because I do, being a speaker, I have some of an ego. I certainly admit that, and I'd like people to pay attention to me at times, especially if everybody's there. It's like my own little show, but it can be obnoxious. I admit that, but I feel that it definitely allows me not to have to go places. It allows me not to have to go I can just talk to people online. I don't have to actually go anywhere, and it feels safer.
Yes. And that's what I hear from a lot of introverts. And again, it's also about balance, because you don't want to be exclusively, in front of your computer screen all day. And I totally feel like overuse of any strength becomes a weakness. I see that time and time again. So you can be really great at managing your social media, but if that's all you're doing and you're not ever seeing people face to face, I think you really do lose out on learning. To your point earlier about really feeding your curiosity, there are some advantages about occasionally seeing each other. And I currently am in a situation here in a shared office environment, and I see a lot of introverts around me, and I think it's a really great example of this concept that I found called communal solitude. So that's a really good example where you're working on your own, and then, you might have a conversation or two throughout the day, or you might not. And there's just this idea that you're around people. So I think people, and even the introverts will tell me that they like that better than being at home alone. Even though they like being alone, they like the option to occasionally have a conversation and learn something about somebody. So again, I think thinking about what works for you, and the more you know about your own needs, how much downtime you need, how much you need to push yourself a little to get out of that comfort zone. And I say that for both introverts and extroverts. Extroverts need to rev it down some too, or they're never creating and being effective, if they never stop to really take a look at what's going on with themselves and are on to the next rush.
So how can we get them to work together? Because I think extroverts have a tendency to be in leadership roles. I mean, it's not always that way. There are some very good, quiet, introverted leaders because they do a great job and they know how to interact. They know how to interact with folks. But I think most of the time it seems to be leadership roles go to the bold and to the people who speak up. So how can they take a look around at their people and start using those introverts and see their value? Because it's great to talk about it, but how can we actually convince some people who aren't taking that time? Like I have a boss, theoretically, I have a boss that's not paying attention to the introverts. How can I talk to him about, hey, let's start using these people more effectively?
I think part of that's a really great question. So what we need to start doing is talking about this and just actually labeling it. I think when we don't talk about the elephant in the room, for instance, if somebody's in a meeting and you notice that they're sort of always being talked over, as we've all seen happen, and they don't really know, as you said earlier, where to put their word in. Then perhaps you, as their friend, as their coach, as their ally, maybe toss the ball to them, and ask them to comment on something. Or you play to their strengths by helping them beforehand say, look, we're going to be talking about this on the agenda. I think this would be a great time for you to showcase what your team's been doing. So again, you play to their strengths. You ask them to write you their thoughts about something rather than always being in their office asking, what do you think about this? Like I used to have a boss always do that. So what do you think about this? Without any time to really reflect. So I think to model this type of behavior is really the most effective way rather than try to talk to your boss about it. If you start doing some of these things yourself, we can only be responsible for our own behavior. We can't change somebody else. Then you start to change a culture. And one quick example I'll give, I was working with a company, a scientific institute a few years ago in D.C., and one of the women who brought me in, who was an HR lead, was very introverted. She barely spoke to me the whole time I was there. And, you never know what can really make a difference. And so I said, Heather, and it was a really good gig. I was, really pleased with how it went. And she was a real change agent in her organization. She had actually set up an introvert-friendly work party where she didn't have all this mass meat market, had places people could go and have quiet conversations, all these scientists. And when she dropped me off at the airport, I said, so what was the real reason you hired me? I know you saw me at this other conference. And she goes, well, yeah, your speech was really good, but that's not why I brought you in. And I was like, really? What was it? And she said, well, when we were doing the book signing, you looked up at me and you asked me about some things about my work. And you connected with me, and I thought, oh my gosh, it's the small things, really, Craig, that make the difference in terms of connecting with people. And so I think if we do that kind of thing, we recognize the people around us, then, who knows where that can go. It's just, it's keeping those in mind makes a huge difference.
Well, the book is The Genius of Opposites, How Introverts and Extroverts Achieve Extraordinary Results Together. Jennifer, where can people find about the book, and if they wanted to hire you to come speak to their association, where can they find you?
I'm here. The website, we have a brand new website with a free quiz on there that you can take to see how effectively you work with your opposite partner. It's called JenniferKahnweiler.com, and that's I think that Craig will have that on the website.
Absolutely,
but it's Jennifer. Yes. Yeah, and then it's spelled KahnWeiler.com, JenniferKahnweiler.com. And go there with lots of, as you saw, Craig, lots of free articles and resources, and would love to connect with you and answer any questions you might have.
Well, I've looked over the book. A lot of this is very interesting. I really appreciate your time today, and I will try to be less introverted and I'm less obnoxious when I do it.
Well, I hope you won't. I hope you'll still stay the effective and nice introvert you are, Craig.
Well, I will definitely do my best. And you won't know because I'll be introverted and I won't tell anybody.
Thank you so much for having me today.
That's the show. Thanks again to Jennifer for coming on. We're always looking for great guests. Today's guest was referred by a listener just like you. Thanks, Phil. So send your comments, questions, and especially your guest suggestions to Craig at speakercraigprice.com, or you can go to the feedback page at realitycheckpodcast.com. See you next week.